Уважаемые коллеги,
distinguished colleagues, we welcome you to our meeting of the members of the Security Council, an Arria-formula meeting. This meeting is dedicated to an important topic: saving children from the horrors of the hostilities that Kiev has been waging for nearly 9 years against the residents of the Donbass. At the outset, I'm compelled to mention the scandalous atmosphere in which we had to prepare this meeting. Our British and American colleagues, as far as we could judge, are covering the rest of the Western camp, and that camp is so afraid of the truth that we'll hear today that they objected to the broadcast of our Arria-formula meeting on the UN website. Well, here it is. Here's the price of their dedication to freedom of speech. And the understanding of our Western colleagues within the walls of the UN, you can only hear information that is convenient to them, and anything else that doesn't fall under that category is Russian propaganda. It's quite an Orwellian formula. That's why the live broadcast of our meeting will happen on the Permanent Missions website and on the social networks. We gave you the links to that previously. And now let's turn to the topic of our meeting. The history of the Donbass of the last 9 years is a history of the suffering of civilians and shattered lives. Every lost life is a tragedy. But when you're talking about children, it's a particular tragedy. The war against the residents of the Donbass was unleashed in 2014 by the Kiev authorities. They took power following an anti-constitutional coup d'etat. This fact had the most brutal effect on children. Over these years, hundreds of children died in that region. Dozens more were wounded. The youngest victim of Ukrainian aggression, when that victim died, was only 27 days old. This is sort of a symbol of suffering and hardship of the children of Donbass over the last 9 years. I'm referring to the Alley of Angels in Donetsk. That area has a monument to all the children who have died. Even based on the modest assessments of the OHCHR, which doesn't have the full view of what's happening, over 3,000 civilians, including 152 children, died in Donbass from 2014 to December of 2021. At present, this number is rising rapidly, not least due to the delivery of long-range weapons from the West. As a result of this, the Ukrainian armed forces are reaching civilian areas that they weren't able to reach before. Children are dying. This is happening due to artillery shelling, due to sniper fire. They are being blown up by mines laid by the Ukrainian soldiers back in 2014 to 2015. That happened on forest paths and near water bodies. And they're also scattered by the Ukrainian armed forces in civilian areas. I'm referring to Lepestok landmines, and children are dying or being severely maimed from them. And I'm not going to delve into the details of this many years of merciless war waged by Kiev against the civilians of Donbass, only because they wanted to preserve their identity. I'll merely say that all of these crimes continue to unfold against a backdrop before the very eyes of an indifferent international community. To be more precise, it's the West here who showed its indifference for 9 years and hypocritically refusing residents of Donetsk and Lugansk the right to life. I'll also tell you that children fell victim to the fratricidal policies of Kiev, and they fell victim to the geopolitical ambitions of their patrons. This tragedy could have been stopped if the Kiev regime, that is, had implemented the Minsk agreements, if they'd stopped fighting the Russian-speaking population of the Donbass. This wouldn't have happened if Western states had supported the Minsk process with deeds rather than just words, and if they hadn't used it as a cover to rearm the Kiev regime for further aggression against the Donbass. Russia, for all these years, has drawn the attention of the international community to what Kiev was trying to do every year on the day of the signing of the Kiev agreements, we called upon Ukraine to implement them in the Security Council in vain. In early 2022, Zelensky received a blank check from the West. He took power under the motto of unity and reconciliation with the Donbass. And he should have stopped the criminal policy of Poroshenko, but Zelensky began to forcibly attempt to subdue Russian-speaking citizens. The inhuman violence of Kiev against its former citizens reached a new scale. In order to preserve their lives and to preserve people, the authorities of the DPR and LPR decided to evacuate civilians. Millions of civilians were evacuated from the areas of hostility in Ukraine and the new regions of Russia. Among them, the overwhelming majority of those citizens, overwhelming majority of those children, came in their families. They're accompanied by their parents, guardians, or caregivers. There's only a small share, practically an insignificant share, of those children that were from that were in the charge of homes for orphans and for unaccompanied minors. I'll recall that the evacuation of children from the areas of hostilities was conducted in full compliance with commitments under international humanitarian law and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. This will also be mentioned in more detail by our briefers. However, the Western weapons suppliers and their Kiev marionettes thought it wasn't enough to destroy people with impunity. They decided to shift the blame onto others, and they decided to accuse Russia of kidnapping and deliberately moving children. Apparently, as they see it, children, orphans, should have been left in areas where hostilities were underway. Our former Western partners are certainly humanists. Ukrainian propaganda and the Western media carefully and deliberately distorted the picture. They they said that it was a crime to save those children that were in areas that were subject to shelling by the UAF and using weapons supplied by the West. Thus, the issue of children in these hostilities was cynically used as another element of an anti-Russian informational war. Although, in this informational war, the moving of children by Kiev from the Donbass, which they're saying was forced. They said they were forced to do it. Apparently, this is okay. So the evacuation by Kiev from Donbass, including taking them away from their living relatives, apparently the West doesn't object to that, or as they're saying, that's different. There was an attempt to create a mendacious association with the Second World War, attempt by the West, and they haven't balked at trying to say that Russia is trying to change Ukrainian identity by evacuating children. These manipulations are a crime on many fronts. For example, they're doing this to change the focus from the evil of Nazism, which has been sowed in Ukraine even during the Second World War, and which has raised its head now in Kiev as well, where neo-Nazi groups have come to power and are dictating the policy of the state. The one element of this manipulation is the fact that the West is not concerned about the Ukrainization of Russian-speaking children, those evacuated by Kiev from the Donbass, and they're not worried about the forcible Ukrainization of Russians, which is underway all over Ukraine. Part of this propaganda campaign is the hushing up by the West of the fact that in European countries, Ukrainian refugees are having their children taken away. We have seen various reports that 80 families have had their children taken away in only Germany. Yelena Korolova, for example, is a resident of Dnieper. She had her 4-year-old son taken away, and they were threatening to take away the older son. Oksana Buratevich is a resident of Kiev. She had her 9-year-old son taken away based on a doctor's complaint. There's Yelena Dashko. She's from Severodonetsk. She had her 9-year-old daughter taken away, and she's not allowed to see her. There are many such stories. The same thing is happening in Spain and in Portugal. The number of people that have suffered, numbers in the hundreds. Strangers are taking away little children, and they're taking them into shelters. The mothers that are trying to take their children back are threatened with a criminal prosecution, and the Ukrainian ambassadors and the consul generals are just throwing up their hands. As for quarreling with the governments that are supplying the Zelensky regime with weapons, they can't quarrel with those those countries. We want to ask what will happen to children with Ukrainian identity in German and in Spanish shelters, but apparently that's a different matter. The problem has reached the scale that the mothers have lost hope, and they have turned to social networks and addressed us directly. Let's hear one such mother. I am Elena Kovalova. Hello, the city of Dnipro, Ukraine. I am Oksana Borisova-Baratovich. I lived in the city of Kiev for a long time. I gave birth to this wonderful child, my son.
Моя донька Дашко Юлия Михайлівна, мы с Северодонецка.
Мои дети были похищены социальной службой в Испании, в городе Дерио.
Моего ребенка Ричарда Ковалева 9 месяцев назад пришли и забрали чужие люди. Я эту историю везде всем рассказываю. У меня было уже 4 суда, 5-й суд будет 30 марта в этом году. Мне не отдают ребенка и мне не показывают моему маленького сына уже 83 дня.
Діти були вилучені ювенальною системою в Португалії.
Він зараз у приюті Югенамта. Над ним назначено тимчасове опікунство. І мене в цій країні визнали мамою з синдромом Мюнхгаузена, яка постійно лікує дитину та постійно за нього дуже піклується. Це тут є не нормою. У мене фейки, мою доньку дійсно отримує ювенальна служба Німеччини.
Сообщаю украинским СМИ, что я не являюсь фейком, что я живой человек.
За 9 месяцев, что ребенок находится в Германии под опекой, в какой-то немецкой, как мне сказали, семье, мы видели Ричарда только 3 раза. 3 раза по 1 часу. Ребенок скоро забудет, что у него есть мама. Этот процесс называется отчуждение. Пожалуйста, спасите моего украинского сына. Я вас очень прошу. Это не фейк.
Повідомляю українські СМІ, що я не є фейком. Я реальна людина з України.
Мы просим вас о помощи, чтобы вы помогли забрать нам наших детей. В Европе это не единичный случай. Мы кричим о помощи и просим вас помочь.
Вони нам виставляють такі для нас требування, які ми не можемо ніколи. Признайте, що дитини вашій тут краще. Признайте, що йому буде ліпше в чужій родині. Це мені признати, це мені, живої матері, гарної матері, признати, що моєму синочку в Німеччині буде найкраще, коли він дуже хоче додому. І ми тут опинилися за військових обставин на короткий, деякий проміжок часу. Люди, що це коїться в мірі, в суспільстві? Будь ласка, допоможіть, бо якщо ви не допоможете, це буде крах, це буде... Я потеряю дитину.
Сынка Юлия, город Днепр.
А вот направо.
An attorney contacted us who was dealing with the problem of extracting Ukrainian children from European slavery, or at least trying to do so. This woman has been subject to threats of violence. That's why we hid her face and we changed her voice.
Buenos días, me llamo Joanna Pachicevich, soy estudiante del Derecho Internacional en una universidad londinense enfocada en el mundo hispano, y hace unos meses una periodista con la que colaboro en España me pidió un favor para consultar a un señor español que tuvo la oportunidad de tratar de ayudar a un grupo de menores de un orfanato ucraniano, y quería consultar si era justo que una junta española quisiera tutelar a esos menores en lugar de que lo tutele su organización. Por lo tanto, yo me puse en contacto con ese señor y él me contó que trajo un grupo de 85 personas bajo cuidados de una señora ucraniana, quienes llegaron a España y se alojaron en una escuela religiosa o algún sitio parecido. Y luego la Junta de Castilla y León empezó a tener algunos problemas con con este alojamiento de esos menores y decidió tutelarlos la Junta de Castilla y León. Me mandó los documentos para mostrar que de los 85 menores que ha traído la señora, con su ayuda desde Lvov, los 77 han sido tutelados por Castilla y León. Hasta un cierto momento, hasta mediados de julio del año pasado, yo he tenido contacto con la señora que los trajo, que él tenía un permiso de tutela provisional sobre esos menores del colegio de donde han sido traídos. Y luego he perdido el contacto con ella y en esos momentos no sé cuál es el destino de esos niños. Me gustaría saber qué es lo que ha pasado finalmente con ellos.
Я хочу
I want to take this opportunity to address the civil society of European countries, to those for whom human rights and rights of children are not merely an element for propaganda, a propaganda element to combat Russia, but a system of values. If you can help these Ukrainian mothers, then contact us and we will put you in touch with them directly. Our internet address is on the internet. As for the criminal regime of Zelensky and the European governments providing cover for Zelensky, neither we nor the mothers have much hope for them. On the territory under control of the Kiev regime, we're seeing other crimes against children. For example, there's a widespread practice. I'm referring to taking children away from parents. Those parents that refuse to evacuate from areas adjacent to areas of hostility. Those families are waiting for Russian soldiers to come, and they view those soldiers as liberators. Let's see another clip from an interview from Artyomovsk, which has almost been liberated.
Были вынуждены ехать на территорию Украины, даже если они того не хотели. Потом через время началась принудительная эвакуация детей службами «Белый ангел» и «Феникс». Это были машины, это были военные ребята, которые в полное обмундирование ездили по адресам, ездили по подвалам, искали детей и принудительно именно силой вывозили детей. Если родители соглашались ехать, могли вместе с ними. Если родители были против, забирали детей. Поэтому был у нас период, когда мы своих детей просто прятали. Прятали по холодным квартирам, прятали по другим адресам, по другим подвалам, то есть не там, где они зарегистрированы или их видели ранее. И поэтому у нас, грубо говоря, наверное, 2,5 недели, если не около 3 недель, был вот такой вот, мы прятали. У меня лично прятали тоже девочку 4 лет. Она знала, что это такое «Феникс», что прятаться, когда ей говорили там «тихо», она как мышка сидела. По очереди выглядывали постоянно в окна, чтобы увидеть эти машины. Если машина подъезжает во двор или где-то начинает мелькать, девочек взрослые быстро брали, уходили на другие этажи, от которых были ключи, в холодные квартиры, закрывались и сидели как мышки, пока машины не уедут. Потом возвращались в теплую квартиру, отогревались.
Furthermore, we are receiving letters from lawyers of minors who are being accused by the Ukrainian security forces of transferring information about the position of the armed forces through publications and social media. One of these minors is in pretrial detention center number 4 in Dnepropetrovsk. He's being tortured and is included in a list of prisoners of war for exchange. All this information we have. Any Western human rights NGOs who'd like to examine this, please get in touch with us. The representative of the United States who has cynically accused us of the so-called abduction of children, I want to remind him of the Operation Baby Lift, which, when in 1975 the United States forcefully transferred out of Vietnam over 2,500 children who were supposedly orphans. Then, once they were in the United States, they were transferred to foster parents, and when real Vietnamese parents showed up, they were refused by the American courts to return their child, and we have every ground to suppose that from the moment when in essence the racist methods of the United States at the time have practically not changed. According to open source information, starting from August of December 2021, during the withdrawal of U.S. forces from Afghanistan, at least 1,450 minors were abducted. 200 of them are still in prisons. But as we all know, from the perspective of our Western colleagues, this is something entirely different. Colleagues, the main goal of today's meeting is not only to unmask the blatant double standards of the collective West, but also to dispel the widely circulated myths by Western and Ukrainian media, and to bring to everyone objective information, first-hand information about the evacuation of children from Donbass and measures taken to ensure their security, comfort, and well-being. The truth is that children were evacuated from the area of military activity, which was provoked by the criminal Kiev regime. The fact that all 9 years of the war in the Donbass, Kiev was not interested in the fate of these children and systematically and intentionally exposed them to danger. The fact that there was no mass forced adoption does not exist. The fact that orphans and children who were left without custody of their parents or from institutions located within the administrative borders of the DPR and LPR when their independence was recognized by the Russian Federation were transferred to temporary preliminary guardianship or temporary custody of Russian citizens. This is not adoption, and this option was chosen in order to return the children to parents when they're found. The fact that Russia has not put up any obstacles to maintaining contact or communication between the children with their parents and their relatives is a fact, and this striving to reunite them. The fact that all evacuated children are provided medical and psychological and social support. The fact that all children who have not been returned to their families can't do this because their families are absent, and of that number there were only about 2 dozens. But you'll hear more about this from the Presidential Commissioner for Children's Rights of the Russian Federation, Maria Alexeyeva Lvova, who'll tell you more about care and comfort of evacuated children. Advisor of Mr. Lvova Belova, Alexei Alexandrovich Petrov, who is in charge of humanitarian aspects of this issue, and the Commissioner on Human Rights of the Donetsk People's Republic, Daria Vasilyevna Morozova, advisor, head of the DPR on rights of the children, Eleanor Mikhailova Fedorenko, who will give you the real idea of the catastrophic humanitarian situation in the Donbass and how it impacts children, as well as Evgeny Vladimir Zhilin, who is a physician traumatologist, head of the children's department, traumatological department of the Donetsk Center, who visits sees children every day. First, I want to give the floor to Maria Alexeyeva Lvova Belova. You have the floor.
Надеюсь, что наша встреча положит начало конструктивному обсуждению фактов.
I hope that this will help us understand the real facts rather than rumors or unfounded accusations. I want to first of all tell you a little bit about the key issues related to the organization of daily life of children in Russia. And since February of 2022, the Russian regions have taken in more than 5 million inhabitants of Ukraine and the Donbass. Of them, 700,000 are children. All of them came with parents other relatives or with their legal custodians, legal guardians. Among these children, there were 2,000 from orphanages or children's homes. They came there with their custodians or others who were in their charge. This decision was taken by the authorities of the two republics because there are no safe areas in Donbass. There are no areas where missiles cannot reach. These children have lived for years in a situation of war. They have witnessed missiles. They've witnessed bombs. They know precisely what a bomb shelter is. So I just want to show you the conditions in which these children live. Now I want to tell you about the current status of children from orphanages. As I said at the beginning, about 2,000 kids from children's homes were evacuated to Russia. To date, about 1,300 children were returned to their orphanages. 400, due to the fact that these institutions are constantly shelled by Ukraine, were sent to Russian orphanages in different regions, and they're being cared for in those institutions. And 358 children were placed with foster homes under their guardianship. Now, we've heard figures that the thousands of small children from Mariupol were transferred to Russian families. That is not true. We only had one group of children without custody who were identified by the Russian military. Ukraine did not evacuate these children. They were transferred to the social services. First, they were transferred to Donetsk in a hospital because there was no place for them. In May, a group of 31 children was sent for care to a sanatorium in the Moscow region. So we're talking about 31 children from the Mariupol. So when the time came for them to return, we started discussing with each child the possibility of finding their relatives or close family, and most of them had no one to return to because for some foster parents left abroad, left the country. They others didn't have relatives. Many children asked to help them place them with a temporary foster family, which is what we did. In the Moscow region, we found families. They got to know the children, and the children were placed there. Third were taken by their father. This is covered at length in the foreign media. We're talking about Evgeny Mezhevoy. He was alone in caring for 3 children. He underwent filtration when he tried to leave Mariupol, and the children remained alone, and they were part of that group of 31 children. We immediately found out that these 3 children should be returned to their father, and we intended to send them with someone accompanying them to Donetsk, but Mezhevoy was able to come and take them himself. I just wanted to recall that Ukrainian volunteers cannot work together with the official authorities. We don't have direct contact with them. We work with our volunteers, and our volunteers work with Ukrainian volunteers. So in the evening we found out that Mezhevoy is taking to get his children. My assistant helped him, and then to get the right necessary documents, and then the children were sent home with the father. So it was sad to read afterwards that this story was completely distorted in the media, that supposedly these children we wanted to transfer them to another family. This is a absolute lie. But the other children from this group, 22 children, were transferred to temporary custodianship. Later on, one girl returned to Donetsk under the guardianship of our neighbor. The others were sent to a local center. All of them wanted to also be with foster children. Another information attack was about children in special camps, children camps. Now, last year, with the agreement of the parents, children were sent to recover and rest into the Crimea and the Krasnodarsk Krai. But at the same time, the line of front moved, and so their return transport was not secure. So some of them left the Kherson region, and it was decided that the children should wait until their parents left to get them. But not everyone has this opportunity. You need time to issue a foreign passport, and if the parents cannot get them themselves, you need to have a trusted individual do so. So we got involved when it became clear that there are children who we have not managed to get back. By that time in January, over 2,000 already were reunited with their parents, and over 400 to remain in these camps. So through volunteers, we found the parents, we consulted on preparing documents, informed the authorities of the region, and we provided this information, their contact information, to the International Committee of the Red Cross. So to date, in these camps, 16 children are still there waiting for their parents, and we are sure that we will be able to either return each one of these children to their parents or their relatives, or now, as far as the foster care of children, reuniting children with their parents, that is a top priority, and this has been stated by the president. But first of all, this is not always possible. The children don't always have relatives or family members. Sometimes we don't have that information, but the 358 children from the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic who were put in the care of foster homes were children who were in orphanages before the start of the special military operation. There were children from large families when there were many siblings, 3, 5, 7, even 9 children. We have there's one family, 9 children who was placed in the Pskovsk Oblast. Some of these children have disabilities. Initially, this work had an emergency character. It was essential to move these children from under shelling and move them to safe areas. Optimally, with the agreement of the authorities of the Republic, at least on a temporary basis, foster families were determined. For each child, we were working on the possibility of reuniting with parents if they remain in the Donbass. And I would like to stress this and ask the interpreters to interpret this. We're talking about guardianship and custodianship. As far as adoption of children born in the DPR and LPR, there was no such cases since the start of the military operation. Under the adoption in the legal system of the Russian Federation, we're talking about the form of a form where foster parents and children are considered similar to being biological. Whereas in custodianship and guardianship, this is done as though the children are transferred to to relatives. In any case, when there are biological parents, they always have the right to reunite with their children. We are always ready, if there's information about relatives or parents, we're ready to examine each specific case. We know definitely that the Ukrainian side, for 8 years of constant shelling of institutions, didn't care about any didn't provide any humanitarian assistance, did not put any requests about this. And at the admission of the children themselves, they say, we know who shelled us. We know why we were in bomb shelters. The Ukrainian side did not take any action to return these children to the territory of Ukraine. Obviously, they were fine with children not going to school for months and living in bomb shelters. We consider these conditions unacceptable and will not accept them. We understand that today these children would have continued living in an orphanage or no one would have adopted them. No one would have taken them to a foster family. If we know even of any cases when children from an institution were separated from their children, we're ready to work on that and on each case to involve all institutions to reunite children and families. But in all children where we found foster families, they had the status of orphans even before the start of the military operation. We prepared a short video about how these children are living now.
Летом нам позвонили и сказали, что привезли очень много детей из Луганской и Донецкой областей, и не возьмем ли мы ребенка. Мы сказали, что, в принципе, да, готовы взять в такой ситуации ребенка. И осенью забрали 2 детей, 2 братьев.
Это мы маме делали. Это папе на 23 февраля, это маме на 8 марта. Это на Новый год.
Никита, которому 9 лет, очень сильно пострадавший ребенок. В общем-то, пережил смерти мамы и папы в маленьком возрасте и психологически очень сильно закрылся. Вот сейчас пошел какой-то прогресс, когда он уже привык.
О! Оно светится.
Виталик вот с Луганска, который у нас приехал, хочет стать строителем. Хорошо очень собирает лего, занимается конструированием из бумаги.
Могу вам представить вот часть моей, так сказать, миниатюрной коллекции лего. Костюм Железного человека. Это я даже, в принципе, не знаю, как назвать. Это что-то похожее на подобие трактора.
Очень хорошие дети.
Ну, вначале, конечно, была сложность в том, что неизвестно, дети взрослые. Но на сегодняшний день стало понятно, что они как здесь и были.
Я учусь на жилищно-коммунальные услуги. Я, может быть, буду переводиться в следующем году туристически.
Хочешь путешествовать?
Да.
Я пошел на сварщика. Практика у меня там.
Он и до этого был сварщиком, поэтому ему нравится.
Быстро как-то адаптировались, привыкли и сговорились. Ну, у нас молодежи много, и они, поэтому я думаю, что, глядя на них, да, и у нас попроще получилось.
Хорошо живется, очень хорошо.
Все уютно, все комфортно.
Четверо у нас с Катей своих детей, и остальные дети приемные. Есть 5 детей, в том числе из Луганской Народной Республики. 3, 4, 6, 11 и 13 лет. 1 брат, получается, и 4 сестры. 5 – это одна семья.
Ну, мне все нравится, то, что много братьев и сестер. И все. И мама нравится.
А папа?
И папа нравится.
Colleagues, I want to stress that unlike the Ukrainian side, we don't use children for propaganda, because currently, even children who are in Russia and who are in safety and security, Ukraine is putting pressure on them and persecution. they are asked to film videos. And through blackmail, they're being extracted from Russia. This is unacceptable. We have facts. We have family names of children with whom Ukraine is trying to do this, and we understand that we are worried about the fate of these children and the parents who have accepted these children, because the Ukrainian side has publicized the names of the families who have taken in children, saying that sooner or later they will have to answer for what they have done. Colleagues, we're fully open to cooperation in the interests of the children. We have met with representatives of UNICEF, UN Commissioner for Refugees, International Committee of the Red Cross, and we provided all available information about the situation of children. We explained the situation about their organization of their life. Now we're coordinating efforts with the Red Cross and reunification. But unfortunately, there's no official cooperation through official channels with Ukraine, although we're ready to work through the relevant bodies. We have not received a single request from their side, only completely unfounded accusations in the media and social media. We have no doubt that this is a campaign to discredit our country and attempts to conceal their irresponsible actions about children. Vasily Alexeyevich provided information about concrete families, concrete individuals. We haven't received information about a single relative, a single individual who was separated from their children. Our position remains unchanged. We're ready for cooperation in the area of reunification of families. In conclusion, I want to recall the famous biblical story about King Solomon, where he had two women claiming to be the mothers of a child, and thank you.
Спасибо.
Thank you for this information, Maria Alexeyevna, and for not only your difficult but really hard work and important work dedicated to children. Now I'd like to give the floor to the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Donetsk People's Republic, Daria Vasilyevna Morozova.
Дарья Васильевна, вас не слышно.
We can't hear you.
Микрофон.
Microphone, please.
Добрый день.
Good afternoon, and thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, I welcome all of you and all those present. My presentation will deal with specific statistical data. This includes data from international institutions that have revealed accusations of supposedly forced deportation of children from areas of hostility to the territory of the Russian Federation. I'll tell you the true threat, the threat facing minors that reside in this region. I'll tell you about the reasons why today Ukraine and the countries backing it are trying to discredit the efforts of Russia to save the lives of the citizens of the Donbass, including the lives of minors. In early 2022, it became clear that Ukraine didn't intend to settle the conflict in the Donbass by peaceful means. The Minsk process was broken off. Kiev was to blame for that, and the ceasefire agreement was annulled unilaterally. Tensions rose on the line of contact. Just in the week preceding the announcement of a mass evacuation of Donetsk, Ukrainian armed formations launched onto the territory of the DPR almost 100 shells that were prohibited under the Minsk agreements, and the Ukrainian soldiers received a direct order to open fire at will. We saw that drones were used, drones with special explosive devices to strike civilians. Ukraine stepped up its positions on the front, but also rather adding not only personnel, but also state-of-the-art weaponry. Considering these circumstances, on the 18th of February 2022, the authorities of the DPR decided to organize an evacuation of the population. They decided also to suspend educational and scientific activity in the Republic. Why was that step the only correct step to take? Over 8 years of conflict, we understood very well the threat posed by escalation by Kiev. At the beginning of the onset of the special military operation, there were people that had already died from Ukraine shelling. 4,374 civilians died, including 91 children. Nearly 8,000 civilians were wounded to varying degrees of severity. This includes 323 children. No fewer than 27 of those children were left with disabilities. I'll give you some examples. The 13th of August, 2014, from Ukraine, a strike was conducted. It was an airstrike, and it hit a children's pool in Zugres, and cluster munitions we hit 13 civilians, including 3 children. On the 5th of October, 2014, in the Telmenovsk region, there was a sniper who killed, by shooting them in the head, a 16-year-old arrest B. On the 18th of January 2015, in the Kirovsk region of the Donetsk city, the four-year-old Artyom B. was hit by artillery and buried in earth, as a result of which the young child suffocated. On the 27th of April 2016, Ukrainians shelled Yelenovsk, and 5 children died. Other than attempts to physically destroy the residents of the region, there were socioeconomic restrictions introduced. The region was subject to a total economic, food, transport, informational, and water blockade. Thus, Ukraine created conditions for the society that not only grossly violated their rights, but also jeopardized their lives directly. There was also a decision taken in December of 2014. Kiev cemented that decision in law, and moreover, Ukraine deliberately didn't hide its intention to destroy the next generation of the Donbass. I'll recall a infamous quote from the President Poroshenko, who is the one who signed the Minsk agreements. He said, "We will have jobs; they won't have jobs. We'll have pensions; they won't. We'll care for children and pensioners; they won't. And our children will go to school, and their children will sit in basements." That was his promise. He made the promise during his statement in Odessa on the 23rd of October 2014. For all these years, Kiev has done its utmost to make good on the promise by Poroshenko. For our part, we've done our utmost to draw the attention of the international community to the many cases of war crimes committed by the Kiev regime. I'm the ombudsman, and as such, since the beginning of the conflict, I sent to the ICRC, the UN, and UNICEF around 600 such letters. And the coordinator, the Minsk coordinating group of the OSCE, Charlotte Relander, visited the Donbass and saw how the Ukraine had destroyed it. For example, she was struck in particular by kindergarten number 189, which was hit directly by Ukrainian shells. After that, it was reduced to a ruin. It's important to understand that that's only one institution. Up until the moment of the beginning of the special military operation, Ukraine carried out targeted shelling. That shelling destroyed or damaged 850 education sites. I want to stress that the murder of our children, the attempts to exterminate them with hunger, cold, and the lack of medical care and basic services, those attempts continued, even against the backdrop of the supposed Minsk peace process. And so we objectively forecast the repercussions of a full-fledged open military operation, a military operation planned by Kiev. I want to stress that the murder of our children, the attempts to exterminate them, will never lead to the desirable result of Kiev. I'll give you, for example, a quote. It's drawn from a recent interview from a POW. He's a 25-year-old Vadim Tokar. He's a Ukrainian spy, a machine gun operator, And he was taken prisoner. And he said openly that anyone who doesn't support the Kiev Maidan needs to be sent to the gas chamber. And for the children of the Donbass, there would be no mercy because they will grow up to be the same sort of dissidents. Taking into account the direct threat for the life and the health of the residents of the Donbass, including the life and health of minors, the decision to undertake the evacuation was not a crime, as people will try to, as Ukrainian politicians try to have you believe. That evacuation was an operation to save children who were completely innocent. Given the fact that it's closer, children from the Donbass primarily went to Russian territory. Moreover, the Russian Federation did everything it needed to ensure that the refugees had all the conditions that they needed. For example, social protection, giving people housing and giving them the opportunity to get jobs. Ukraine did the contrary. It blocked the green corridor to its territory. And there are even many more cases of the shooting of civilian automobiles, of civilians that tried to leave the red zone through Ukrainian border crossings. The civilians were necessary for Kiev only as human shields. I'll turn to the evacuation of children from the territory of the DPR. Within the borders before the special military operation, there were COVID restrictions introduced, and 71 children from 3 children's homes under the Ministry of Healthcare of the DPR were evacuated. There was evacuation of 761 orphans and children under the care of their parents, and 165 children from children's social centers were evacuated. I wish to stress a point here. These are the numbers only for the Donetsk People's Republic. All of the other children left the area under control of the DPR together with their parents. And you can only imagine how serious the threat was, the threat that led people deliberately to decide to become refugees, but to get their children out of the area of hostilities. I wish to point out that the local authorities and Russia took every measure to ensure the safety of the population. Moreover, they acted strictly in the interests of the children and following the law, including international humanitarian law, specifically paragraph 2, article 6 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. This was adopted by the UNGA on the 20th of November 1989. That convention obligates the member states to ensure to the utmost degree the survival and the health of children's development. Paragraph 4, Article 38 of that document stresses that pursuant to their commitments under international law related to civilians in armed conflicts, member states must undertake to make every effort to ensure the protection of children affected by armed conflicts and to care for those children. I'd like to recall that on the 28th of February 2022, the European Network of Ombudsmen for the Rights of Children, the Ombudsman, in a statement, said that it was necessary to take urgent action to protect children in Ukraine. She called upon all stakeholders to ensure safe and swift delivery of humanitarian aid to all children and their families that needed it. As for the governments of the countries, they should share the responsibility and open their borders for refugees and families from Ukraine. And there was the ICC said that there was that children are stealing Russia from the Donbass. That seems to be baseless. Yet what we're doing is trying to save our children. The Russian Federation responded to calls of international relations to organize assistance to refugees and to show humanism. We believe that this decision of the ICC discredited its professional competency, and it has fully shown itself to be a biased court. The supposed concern for the lives of the residents of the Donbass seems particularly obscene if you know that this body of international justice, starting in 2014, has not responded whatsoever to the many suits filed by the parents of children, children who died as a result of Ukrainian shelling in the region. Also, the arrest warrant for Russian state officials was issued in contravention of all legal procedures. I thank you for your attention, and I'm convinced that the facts that I've disclosed will fully disclose the real reasons for Kiev's media provocation on what should be an inviolable topic, the preservation of children's lives. Ukraine and its Western handlers are doing their utmost to divert the attention of the international community from the 9-year history of the genocide of the people of the Donbass. They are concocting ever more absurd pretexts for discussions on the international stage. It is my sincere belief that common sense and justice will prevail, and measures to hold to account the true war criminals will finally be taken. That is the most important thing that everyone can do today, everyone that is genuinely interested in creating a safe environment for children in the Donbass and all over the world. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Daria Vasilyevna, for your in-depth analysis of the situation in Donbass, including in terms of the rights and security of children. Now I'd like to give the floor to Alexei Alexandrovich Petrov. Thank you for giving me the floor. I'll try to be brief because a lot has been said already. I'll start with what's most important. Our country is providing significant assistance to the newly liberated territories, but you won't see this in the foreign media. You won't read about this on the pages of foreign media. This information is blocked. They don't want to talk about the good deeds, about volunteers, about mutual assistance. And today, I want to tell you about the simple and main assistance that we're providing, that is to children and the families of children. For each individual, childhood is a special period. It's a bright period, but childhood is not accessible to everyone. For some children, simple pleasures, walking with friends or riding a bicycle, going to school is impossible. These children are in a bad situation and they require urgent assistance. They need to be cured. They need to be rehabilitated. Their families need to be found. They need to be provided with psychological assistance. And this is what the humanitarian team of the Commissioner for the Rights of Children is working. And in our contacts with children, we hear their stories, what they experience. And sometimes what they tell us is shocking. I want to just give you two very two stories that I heard from teenagers. In our first meeting with children in Mariupol, we asked children, why are you supporting Russia? Why are you welcoming us so warmly and authentically? Their expression changed because they told us, we know who is who. We are seeing how the Ukrainian army treated us and how Russia is treating us. When the Ukrainian army was active in Mariupol and they were herding 40 or 50 kids from one area to another, they shot at our feet to make us move faster. We're talking about 14-year-old kids. Another example, just very recently, there was a recreation camp period that ended, and after that period, a girl from Zaporozhye, 15 years old, published something in their social media with the flag of Russia, and immediately she heard threats that as soon as you come home, we're going to kill you. But what's amazing is that not this, but the fact that this girl said, we're used to it. They always write this. So the question that begs to be asked, why should she continue listening to this? And believe me, this is just one example of what these children are exposed to. As part of our humanitarian activity that we started in April of last year, we're seeing active work on measures to provide humanitarian assistance to children, teenagers, and their families who are in a difficult situation. We're providing assistance to children and families from regions that are shelled, to children's organizations and institutions, poor families. We're providing goods, basic necessities, including food, personal hygiene, clothing, etc. But here I want to just touch upon a very important aspect, and that is medication. You know, there's a disease when children do not absorb protein, and we provide specialized food for these children to the Zaporozhye and Donetsk region. We have supplied such food. Without that, these children would have died. As part of this humanitarian action, 21 humanitarian convoys were organized. Over 10,000 people received assistance. Over 220 tons of humanitarian assistance to the tune of 157 million rubles. The Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic, Zaporozhye and Khersonsk Oblast were also covered. This came from such regions as the Rostov region in Russia and the Crimea. And we don't intend to stop. We're going to expand these convoys, expand the assistance that we'll be providing. During the period of this campaign, together with the Russian humanitarian mission, we have provided support to the prenatal center in the city of Makeyevka. We supplied 2 incubators that are quite costly. Now I'd like to just focus on what is called in foreign media re-education camps. And let's watch a video now.
Я считаю, что смена прошла просто ошеломительно. В течение лагеря очень сложно было перечислить, чем мы занимались, потому что занятий было бесконечное множество. Но больше всего мне запомнились подготовки к выступлениям и репетиции.
Смена была очень насыщенной. У нас было много различных мероприятий, концертов, конкурсов. У нас были занятия с психологами. Мы обучались чему-то новому на технограде. В общем, скучать нам было некогда. У меня появилось много-много новых друзей. И несмотря на то, что мы все живем в разных областях, мы по сей день продолжаем общаться.
Прекрасные вожатые, прекрасное руководство, это очень круто. Еще раз бы поехал бы. 2 недели это очень мало, наверное, на год бы поехал.
Вместе в таком симбиозе, в дружеском общении ребята и обретут ту самую детскую мечту, которая в дальнейшем станет для них реальностью.
Спасибо.
Thank you. So these authentic emotions, smiles, etc. You've seen them. That is not a montage. It's not propaganda. These are just children who finally were able to feel that they're children. They don't need to hide. They're happy. They're in security. They're in safety. Our projects on camps was born in Mariupol after we met with teenagers and we asked them, kids, what would you expect from these camps? And they told us, just peaceful, happy life. We want to try to understand who I want to be when I grow up, where I want to study. We just want to be children, and that is precisely the simple happiness is what they're receiving in these camps. From August of 22 until March of 2023, seven camp sessions were conducted, and children from the Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson took part. This involves working with psychologists. You cannot imagine what kind of noise. There was a lot of noise about these meetings with the psychologists. A lot of ado about this. But many children went through these camps, these sessions. As far as the programs that we've organized, this involves programs where they get presentations from Russian universities, vocational orientation, telling them about new professions, who they could be when they grow up. Can you really call this a re-education camps? What's important is that the children who were in these camps are now working, and many of them are working as volunteers in our humanitarian teams. They want to help. And this is something that's very positive. And everything that I'm telling you now, can this seem horrible or not right? And yet, precisely now, our team of volunteers are being accused, insulted, threatened. When my teammates are bring me reports from social media where their personal contact is published, where threats to their lives or is this what the norm is? Is this what is this just? Is this fair? I mean, do people who are simply doing good, do they deserve this kind of treatment? Colleagues, for this and in conclusion of my statement, I would invite you to come and visit these camps and these sessions and to take part in providing humanitarian assistance to help children reunite with their families. I have no doubt that when you see this and when you feel all this, when you look into the eyes of children, when you talk to them, to the parents, and hear from firsthand, I think you'll understand a lot. Thank you. Thank you, Alexei Alexandrovich. I think before we give the floor to the next speaker, I want to just make one clarification. In the Russian language, the word camp has a completely different connotation than in English, the word lager or camp. In Russian, lager, camp, is a place of recreation, rest, where, for example, like a summer camp, where teenagers or those in school. We ourselves went through the pioneer camps during the Soviet time, and believe me, these were not the kind of camps and based on the notion that some of our Western colleagues put in that word. Now I'd like to give the floor to the advisor of the Commissioner on the Rights of the Children, Eleonora Mikhailova-Fedorenko.
Good morning, distinguished members of the Security Council, distinguished colleagues. Good morning. At the outset, I would like to show a video clip. It'll be sort of an announcement, and it will provide some statistics. Maria Alexeyevna, Daria Vasilyevna mentioned that we'll see what's actually happening, how the evacuation is proceeding.
Провожаю ребенка. Волнительно, когда смотрели заседание СНБО, когда смотрели уже обращение президента Российской Федерации, но уже как бы морально мы были к этому готовы. Мы уже ждали. Вот сейчас он скажет рады. До конца еще не верится. Я надеюсь, все будет хорошо и надеюсь, что...
I hope that everything will go well. I hope everything will end well. We're sending our child to the rehabilitation center. I hope that that child is able to speak. I think everything will go well. I want our children to live in happiness and tranquility without any bombing. I'm taking my son away here. I'm really worried about how I'll be there, but I think everything will be good there. I think they'll be met.
А вы в последние дни слышали, чтобы громко стреляли?
Кто-то что-то нажал.
А вы в последние дни слышали, что...
In recent days, have you heard any shooting or any explosions?
Судя по всему, это...
Apparently, we have a bit of a technical difficulty. I hope that, yes, unfortunately, maybe at the end it will work out and we'll be able to take a look at this video clip. I want to tell you the following. There's disinformation and slander, and it is increasingly used as an instrument of foreign policy of Ukraine and of its Western partners. The reality is different. The worst thing is that the victims are the least well-protected residents of our country, the children. We're seeing a well-planned informational bubble where the world community is seeing Russia presented as a country of an aggressor, a state of terrorism. But what's actually happening is that today, 470 children, or up until today, 470 children have been wounded to various degrees of severity. And 1,000 children have been wounded and psychologically wounded. So if you read the headlines of the big Western tabloids, then we see that our Western opponents are doing everything they can to focus on children. This is not a new topic, and it's always wrapped in pathos and distorted facts and hypocrisy. What we're actually talking about is children that were left behind without children and without custodians in areas of hostility. The children are not taken away from their parents, rather, they're taken out of destroyed houses and removed from hostilities. Many commenters are saying the opposite, but the reports about the kidnapping of Ukrainian children first emerged on the 19th of March, when the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced that there were 2,389 children taken from Lugansk and Donetsk. At the same time, we heard many comments from parents. They said that their children, on the pretext of going to a children's camp on the territory of the region, were taken to Lvov, and then later they were planning to take them outside the borders of Ukraine. Active measures were planned to return these children to their families. According to the authorities of Ukraine, up until early summer, the number of children forcibly brought from Ukraine reached 1.2 million people, but that's far from reality. What the Ukrainian authorities have said, and the numbers that have sounded from the rostrums of international organizations, are incorrect. There are sometimes reports of children or groups of children that are unaccompanied minors, and throughout the special military operation, 141 children whose safety was violated as a result of the conflict were noted. That's 141 people who sometimes had their parents die, or they got lost during evacuation. But there were also cases when children announced that they were left in the children whose status was not established, while the children that were without their parents and without guardians and were in medical institutions, or that's another category. In order to ensure the laws of the Russian Federation and the DPR, all measures were taken in order to find children or their relatives. The number of children who were unaccompanied were also in family-type homes. There were 2 such cases. There were only 17 children there, and the oldest one was 17, and the youngest one was 4 years old. And the adults were evacuated onto the territory of France. In this case, we took action. We tried to find and establish contact with the guardians, considering the desire of children to return to their guardians. This is quite surprising. Children forgave them. The children only remember good things. And we took a decision here. We underwent all the legal procedures, and we returned that group of children to their families and their guardians. But there's some other family stories where the opposite happened. For example, there was a family-type home where all of the children were taken out, 8 children. And they were evacuated into a European country. Sorry, we seem to have a technical difficulty. The Guardian had some relatives in Poland. From them, we heard that her three biological children were returned by court decision, but the children that were under her guardianship, and we've started meeting about this incident, those children are still not in the family. And they're not in the hands of the person that the care of the child is entrusted to. Our aim today will always be primarily the safety of the children. We'll try to find their relatives too. The reality, this reality is the story of every child that has found its families, the mother and child. When people provide documents that confirm that they are the parents or guardians of children, we've provided the children to those 112 people, and 12 children have been returned to their caregivers. We're doing our utmost to give children to their guardians or lawful custodians. Over the last 9 years, and especially in the last year and a half, people aren't able to receive full-fledged education. Almost every day we hear information about partial or full destructions of children's educational institutions. Some of these educational institutions are in recently liberated territories, and some of them are subject to regular shelling by armed formations of Ukraine, and they're compelled to carry out remote education. The organizations for orphans and unaccompanied minors were evacuated into safe areas of the country. 288 children were put in families, and as Maria Alexeyeva said, that's a large family group, and children with disabilities were affected too. Throughout this entire period, 905 children were evacuated from the DPR. Donbass is a particular area where almost the entire territory is deadly for children. The Republic of Donbass, according to the UN, is in 5th place in the world as regards the density of unexploded ordnance and mines. According to the children are most at risk. And I think the Human Rights Ombudsman under the president of the Russian Federation, Maria Alexeyeva Lvova-Belova, for saving the children. I thank all the organizations and the state bodies, the organizations who provided assistance with education and help for children. The protection of the rights, freedoms, and the legitimate interests of children who are the members of society is a strategic priority for the state family policy and the DPR. Thank you.
Thank you, Eleonora Mikhailovna, for your information. Now it's a great honor for me to give the floor to Evgeny Vladimir Zhelitsyn, who every day is fighting to save children's lives. You have the floor, Evgeny Vladimirovich. Good morning, distinguished members of the Security Council. Once again, let me introduce myself. I am Evgeny Vladimir Zhelitsyn. I am the head of the pediatric section of the Donetsk Traumatological Center. This year, our department is marking its 70th anniversary. Since the moment of the creation of our department, it has been providing assistance to children with disease and traumas of the locomotor apparatus. Up to 2019, in spite of the fighting, in spite of the separation on the front lines and checkpoints, we were often received children from Mariupol, Kherson, Kurachovo, Avdiivka, and other towns from the Ukraine to provide urgent treatment. Unfortunately, starting in 2020, COVID-19 pandemic occurred, and as a result of that, borders were closed, and we were not an exception. And then, obviously, over the past few years, increasing shelling has not contributed to parents taking their children for treatment in our department. One of the areas of our activity of our department is treating trauma. Up to 2014, we were busy working on so-called peaceful time traumas. These are children who are hurt playing on when they fell off bicycles, or playing on playgrounds, or sometimes in car accidents. But since then, of course, we have had to deal with very different types of injuries, and we're seeing how children are suffering as a result of the activity of adults. For any pediatrician, any children's doctor, these kinds of injuries are really a wounds the heart. Unfortunately, well, this format does not allow us to show these kinds of injuries, pictures of these injuries. But believe me, these are horrible things. Often, we receive children in horrible conditions with injuries to their limbs and hemorrhagic and traumatic shock. Each one of these children has their own history. We've had children who were in a car and they were exposed to shells. There were children who were in their home when a shell hit. Then there were children from playgrounds or from a football pitch. Just over the past year, 137 children were delivered to our department as a result of mines. Several children were injured because they stepped on an anti-personnel mine pedal, often near their home. I won't tell you what the lepestok or pedal mine is, what the goal of that mine is: to severely maim an individual. Now, separate attention deserve children who suffered because they found some explosive device. Eleonora Mikhailovna just told you about the number of these explosive objects. It's true. Very regularly, we have children who come to our hospital. Donbas is packed with the soil is packed with explosive devices, and I fear that for many years into the future, we will see children who will receive traumas as a result of finding these types of objects. I want to note that in spite of the very severe condition of the children who we receive and who have suffered as a result of explosions, of all those who have delivered alive over the past 9 years, one child died. It was a teenager who was transported to us in 2015. He suffered from a shelling literally just 500 meters from our hospital. He was buying flowers for his girlfriend, and he was delivered with both his legs torn off and with other injuries. We fought to save his life for 36 hours, but unfortunately he died due to injuries incompatible with life. Of the 137 children with trauma due to explosions or mines that were transferred to our department, two had amputations conducted. 4 others that were delivered with the separation of a limb due to a shell, and there was nothing to be done in those cases. I can tell you that over 60 children who absolutely was clear that they needed to be amputated, ultimately the limb was saved. Children's doctors or pediatric specialists in our department are basically fighting to save every centimeter of a limb of each child. We believe that what God has created is the most perfect creation. This is why, if there's even 1% of a probability of saving a leg or an arm, of a child, we try to do that. These results from our treatment were made possible only due to the high professionalism and self-sacrifice of all the doctors and staff members of the traumatology department of Donetsk. Also, the fact that we've had the necessary equipment and facilities. Thanks to the help of Maria Alexeyeva Lvova-Belova, over the past year, our trauma department has received a significant amount of various types of equipment, new surgery room, especially vacuum apparatus for a serious injury. All hospital beds were replaced by new multifunctional ones. This has no doubt improved the quality of the medical assistance provided to all the children who are being treated in our department. As a pediatric specialist, a children's specialist for over 20 years, for whom the health of children is the top priority, independently of any political considerations or situations, I believe that rehabilitation is a part and parcel, integral part of the process of treatment of children with these kinds of injuries to their limbs. Unfortunately, today in the DPR, we don't have the opportunities to conduct rehabilitation. As a result of that, for the full recovery of certain patients with the consent of the children or guardians and with their accompaniment after they have been released or from the hospital where their lives were sent, they are then transferred to rehabilitation centers in the Russian Federation, and the representatives in charge of the commissioners on the rights of children of the Donetsk Republic and the Russian Federation provided assistance in this process. I want to thank everyone for this opportunity to brief you, and I just want to say that all of us, we hope that the fighting will stop in the near future on the territory of Donbas, and that we will stop having injured children transported to us, and our experts and doctors will start to deal with more routine work. Thank you very much. It's very difficult to hear what you're telling us. We ourselves have seen pictures, horrific pictures of these kinds of injuries caused by mines or explosives that children from the Donbas have received as a result of the actions of the Ukrainian armed forces. So thank you very much for your invaluable work every single day to save the lives and health of children. I see that everyone is here now, and I would like to thank the representatives of the United States, United Kingdom, Albania, and Malta for their frequent and feverish migration from this room. This is a clear demonstration of their indifference to the fate of the children of Donbas and Ukrainian children. We organized our meeting to tell the truth about this situation, firsthand testimony from those who are involved in this on a daily basis. This is precisely why we're holding this informal meeting of the Security Council under the Arria-formula. But you don't want to listen to this. You're not interested. Of course, it's not very pleasant for you to hear this, and it compromises your own narrative. You don't need the truth. You have already delivered a verdict on the basis of false facts and information, just as you did with the so-called fake cases of the poisoning of Skripal, Bucha, and others. You prefer to live in your cocoon of lies and maintain your public in that cocoon. Anything threatening that is Russian propaganda, and of course we will hear about that. And it's precisely you and not us are introducing censorship in the Security Council. I want everyone here to clearly understand this. Now I'd like to give the floor to the delegations, members of the Security Council who have put their name on the speakers list. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for organizing this meeting. In this debate, we must be guided by a fundamental principle of international human rights law, the best interests of the child. There can be no dispute about the importance of protecting children from war and its impacts. Let us not allow political rivalry to worsen the situation of children which are already victims of a conflict they did not initiate. Brazil is deeply concerned with violations of children's rights in conflict zones, including reports of the 6 grave violations. We are distressed in this regard with the findings of the latest report of the Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine. We acknowledge that the situation in Ukraine is one of concern for the Secretary General, and that it will be included in his next report on children and armed conflicts. Brazil reiterates the call for all parties to fully respect international humanitarian and human rights law and ensure the protection and safety of children. We also recall the unanimous adoption of this Council's Resolution 2427, intended to strengthen the safeguarding of children during armed conflicts. Mr. President, in accordance with international humanitarian law, forcible transfers and deportation of civilians, especially children, are prohibited, regardless of their motive. Evacuation of a given area can only be undertaken if the security of the population or imperative military reasons so demand. Furthermore, civilians, especially children, shall not be evacuated, but in exceptional circumstances. They shall be transferred back to their homes as soon as hostilities have ceased. Furthermore, Brazil believes the adoption of children separated from their parents is unacceptable during war, inasmuch as adoption entails new parent-child relationships with termination of the rights of the birth parents. In this regard, it is of the utmost importance to respect the right of the child to preserve his or her identity, including nationality, to ensure that the child shall not be separated from his or her parents against their will, and to facilitate family tracing and reunification of unaccompanied and separated children. Mr. Chair, Brazil believes that the most effective way to protect children from the inevitable suffering caused by war in Ukraine is to immediately cease hostilities. We reiterate our support for a negotiated solution with the goal of a just and sustainable peace in the long term. I thank you.
Я благодарю. I thank the representative of Brazil. Now I give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. I thank the Russian Federation for convening this Arria-formula meeting of the Security Council and the briefers for their comprehensive insights. Mr. Chair, in the situations of conflicts, the children are among the primary victims of vulnerable and affected groups whose lives are irreversibly traumatized by the horrors of the wars. These situations of strong vulnerabilities of children unites the world to condemn and mobilize actions conducive to protect and salvaguard their well-being, and to ensure that their rights are upheld and provide them with opportunity to live in a safe environment. Earlier this year, in February, we have had an opportunity to extensively discuss the issues of children in armed conflict agenda in light of Security Council's Resolution 1261 and 2427. However, we are concerned about the persistent grave violations affecting children around the world during conflicts. the Secretary General's annual report on children and armed conflict for 2021 and 2022, indicated that a total of 23,982 cases were noted, pointing grave violations. These figures demand from us further actions to ensure the protection of children's rights by using international available tools of protection. In this regard, Mozambique calls upon all the parties involved in the conflict to ensure that children are protected from trafficking and deprived from their right to education. Mr. Chair, Mozambique deems important that the concerns regarding the treatment of children raised in relation to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine are addressed. In this respect, we call on both parties to allow the provisions of humanitarian support to the children by national and international partners in light of Geneva Conventions and their additional protocols, to continue to engage with the officials, the Office of the Special Representative of Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict, and the Office of the Special Representative of Secretary General on Violence Against the Children. We also call on the parties to this conflict to be engaged in dialogue conducive to the end of the conflict, which could contribute to avoid excessive use of indiscriminate and disproportionate heavy weapons, including explosives. The use of weapons in populated areas is abating the suffering of children and constitute obstacles for them to enjoy their fundamental rights. In this regard, we encourage the necessary arrangement to ensure that children are evacuated safely from the affected zones, taking into account the long impact of their displacement and the new reality on the ground. We reiterate that the most effective and sustainable mechanisms to protect children and all civilians at large are put in place to address the root causes and settle conflict peacefully and in a constructive manner. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Mozambique, and now I give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Chair, Malta views today's meeting as a blatant misuse of the Arria-formula. Russia's choice of speakers an affront to the members of the Security Council and the international community, and another clear sign of its complete contempt for the United Nations. Just 2 weeks ago, the Security Council voted against the participation of Ms. Daria Morozova, who was presented as a so-called representative of the Donetsk People's Republic at one of its meetings. Despite this clear rejection, today Russia retaliated by imposing 2 so-called representatives of the DPR. We recall UN General Assembly Resolution ES-11/4 and strongly reaffirm our commitment to the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. The attempted annexations by Russia are illegal and have no validity under international law. Our presence today is purely to counter Russia's disinformation and should in no way be interpreted as recognizing any such altered status. An arrest warrant has been issued by the ICC against a third briefer. These are the people who, in Russia's view, and I quote from the concept note, are able to offer objective information on the situation of children in conflict zones in the Donbass. Colleagues, Russia's aggression against Ukraine is having devastating and long-lasting consequences on Ukrainian children and their families, many of whom have been forced to flee their homes and seek safety elsewhere. UNICEF estimates that roughly half of those displaced are children. Many are unaccompanied or have been separated from their families, leaving them even more vulnerable to violence, exploitation, and abuse. Children have been uprooted, their schools and medical facilities closed, destroyed, damaged, or used for military purposes. Their physical integrity and well-being are constantly threatened by the ravages of conflict. The long-lasting impacts on their physical and mental health will also be severe. Convening an Arria-formula meeting and misusing it to spread disinformation about this chilling humanitarian tragedy is cynical and deplorable. The facts are clear. Over the past year, Ukrainian children have been subject to forced transfers and deportation to Russia or areas under Russian control. In its latest report, the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine concluded that these transfers and deportations violate international humanitarian law and amount to war crimes. As the Commission recommended, Russia must provide reliable and comprehensive information about the number and the whereabouts of all children that have been transferred within or deported for whatever reason. Effective communication between children and their families must be facilitated without delay. Furthermore, children must be promptly and proactively returned to Ukraine in accordance with their best interests and with international obligations, using technical assistance from international organizations. Moreover, Russia must prevent any further transfers within and deportation of children from Ukraine. In this context, we also take note of the ICC's decision to issue an arrest warrant against Ms. Maria Lvova-Belova, the Commissioner for Children's Rights in the Office of the President of the Russian Federation. It was issued for the alleged criminal responsibility for the war crime of unlawful deportation and transfer of Ukrainian children from occupied areas of Ukraine to Russia. Last year, Malta was one of the state parties that referred the situation in Ukraine to the ICC. On this occasion, I underline Malta's full support for the work of the court. We welcome and encourage further efforts to ensure full accountability for war crimes and other serious crimes in connection with Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. We are firm in our belief that such crimes must not go unpunished and that perpetrators must be held accountable. Colleagues, to conclude, Malta reaffirms its commitment towards the Children in Armed Conflict agenda, which remains a priority during our Council term and an integral part of our foreign policy. Our focus is to strengthen the Council's resolve to end and prevent violations against children affected by armed conflict, which we take seriously. Malta also reiterates its call on the Russian Federation to immediately cease its hostilities, to withdraw all its forces from Ukraine, and to respect the UN Charter and uphold its obligations, not least under the Convention on the Rights of the Child. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta, and I have to say I'm greatly impressed by her statement, where she posed questions that she chose deliberately not to listen answers to, which were provided by our today's briefing. This dialogue of deaf with the blind, which you chose to be one of them, is of course a telling thing of how you treat the situation and you treat the people of Donbass and their stories. And now I give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Japan does not recognize illegal occupation and attempted annexation of the territory of Ukraine by Russia, nor condone the alleged conduct which is accused by International Criminal Court. Our attendance to this meeting is without prejudice to this position of Japan. The appearance of briefers on the screen in today's event also does not change the status of the arrest warrant. Japan upholds the rule of law, and any act to discredit to the ICC is unacceptable. We closely monitor with grave interest the development of the investigation. In particular, we uphold that Russia invited the Commissioner for Children's Rights in the Office of the President of Russia, to whom the ICC issued an arrest warrant for the illegal deportation of Ukrainian children, as a briefer for today's meeting on the children who most suffered from Russia's unprovoked aggression on Ukraine. Mr. Chair, we are deeply distressed about the situation of children in the war against Ukraine. It is beyond our imagination how devastating it must be for the children and families who are still separated at this moment. We must not turn out eyes from the root cause. The safety of children in conflict-affected areas of Ukraine is in jeopardy because of Russia's unlawful aggression against Ukraine. So-called evacuation of children is by no means a solution. It is a mere aggravation of the situation. What we need is the immediate evacuation of the Russian forces and military equipment from Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders, not the children. The overwhelming majority of the member states is clear about this, as shown by the GA resolution adopted in February. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan, and now I give the floor to the representative of China.
Ambassador Nebensia, dear colleagues. Ambassador, thank you for convening this meeting. I listened carefully to the briefings of individual briefers and viewed the multiple video clips played at the meeting. Children are the most innocent group in and the most vulnerable victims of armed conflicts. According to the UN, since the conflict in Ukraine broke out, millions of children have become IDPs or have sought refuge in neighboring countries subject to untold sufferings. They need humanitarian assistance and effective protection. Protecting civilians in armed conflicts is an obligation under international humanitarian law. Under any circumstances, protection of civilians, children in particular, must be the top priority. It is imperative to refrain from attacks and violence that might put children in harm's way, and refrain from the use of explosive weapons in densely populated areas. In evacuations and humanitarian relief operations, priority must be given to the needs of children. We support the role of UNDP and WFP in coordinating the synergy of international humanitarian assistance to ensure that children get adequate food and the necessary medical care. China supports UNICEF's work in providing educational supplies and learning opportunities for displaced children, and encourage refugee hosting countries to provide educational support to children seeking refuge and ensure non-interruption of their rights to education. Special care must be given to children seeking refuge, in particular those separated from or unaccompanied by family members. China commends the relevant countries and the UN humanitarian agencies for providing children seeking refuge with safety, security, humanitarian assistance, and mental support. We welcome all measures conducive to early reunification of separated children from their loved ones. We have noted Russia's indication that it will provide preliminary guardianship to children who are separated from their families, that it does not prevent them from contacting their loved ones, and that it is assisting their reunification with their families. Dear colleagues, China is not a party to the Rome Statute, and its position on ICC has not changed. We hope that ICC will uphold an objective and impartial position, respect the law, exercise its function prudently in accordance with the law, interpret and apply international law in good faith, and avoid politicization and double standards. We agree with Brazil and Mozambique. That is, the best protection for children is to eliminate conflict and restore peace. Once again, we reiterate our appeal that diplomatic negotiations must not be abandoned, and that the search for peace must be pursued relentlessly. The international community must promote peace talks with utmost urgency and push the parties concerned to relaunch negotiations without preconditions and without delay. China's position on the question of Ukraine has been consistent and clear. We always maintain that the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries must be respected, the purposes and principles of the UN Charter be observed, the legitimate concerns, security concerns of all countries be taken into account, and all efforts conducive to the peaceful settlement to the crisis be supported. We stand ready to work with the international community to actively promote a political solution to the crisis and to give children a peaceful world and a bright future. Thank you.
The representative of China, and I will give the floor to the representative of Ghana.
Mr. President, 2 months ago, this Council and the international community at large marked the one-year anniversary of the war in Ukraine, which has led to the largest movement of people in Europe since the Second World War. More than 8 million refugees are scattered across Europe, while 5 million remain internally displaced. As we grapple with this reality, we are also confronted by the chilling statistics of children whose hopes of returning home and growing up in their beloved communities of origin are being eroded. As the war persists, displaced children, including unaccompanied children and children evacuated from life-threatening conditions, are becoming increasingly susceptible to violence, exploitation, trafficking, unlawful adoption, and other grave violations. In this regard, Ukrainian and neighboring authorities, as well as the international community, owe it to these children to ensure that child protection systems are strengthened and adequately resourced to eliminate all forms of danger to children, including those being transported to safe locations. We remain convinced, however, that the complete cessation of ongoing hostilities by Russia against Ukraine will serve as the ultimate, most effective, and most sustainable child protection measure. Mr. President, the Convention on the Rights of the Child recognizes the inherent dignity and worth of every child and outlines the basic rights that should be afforded to all children, including to a safe, loving, and happy family environment. This should direct our collective thinking to the fact that safe and orderly child evacuation is a critical component of humanitarian assistance in times of conflict, which should involve the coordinated efforts of governments, aid agencies, and host communities, taking into account the unique needs of each child based on age and health status, among others. It would be erroneous on our part to assume that child evacuation is an end in itself. The ultimate goal of such processes should be the safe return and reintegration of children into their communities of origin and their placement under the care of their parents, legal guardians, or significant caregivers as soon as conditions are safe to do so. For this reason, Ukrainian children separated from their parents or the identity of whose parents cannot be immediately verified should not be subjected to forced cross-border or inter-country adoption by any state or individual under the assumption that they are orphans. Such action greatly endangers the prospects of a future reunification of children with their families. In accordance with the Convention on the Rights of the Child and other international child protection instruments, all states should commit to respecting and preserving the national identity of children as well as their family relations as recognized by law without unlawful interference. The forced imposition of foreign nationality on unaccompanied or separated Ukrainian children, besides that which is recognized by law, violates their rights and under international law. Inter-country adoptions should only be carried out in consultation with authorities in the country of origin and in conformity with the principles of international law. Mr. President, the physical impact of war on communities can be devastating and long-lasting. While the widespread destruction of buildings, homes, infrastructure, and natural resources are perceivable, psychological and emotional wounds, especially those suffered by children, can be grossly underemphasized. My delegation therefore calls on host and transit countries to ensure that beyond the safe evacuation of Ukrainian children, their mental and psychosocial health remain an essential element of their interventions. We believe that such interventions should minimize the enduring impact that the ongoing crisis will have in the lives of children in Ukraine. In conclusion, Mr. President, we would like to thank neighboring and impacted states for their commitment to providing a decent life to all Ukrainian child refugees. Let me reiterate that the safety of children in Ukraine rests primarily with the restoration of peace, which can be achieved only through Russia's respect for the political independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Ukraine. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ghana, and now I give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Monsieur le Président.
President, since their inception 30 years ago, Arria-formula meetings have allowed council members to receive expert advice and information informally outside the council chamber. This format was never intended to spread disinformation, to distort realities on the ground, or to promote a politically biased narrative. Russia's selection of speakers today clearly runs counter to this initial objective. We reject the participation of so-called representatives of the Donetsk People's Republic, as well as a person under investigation by the International Criminal Court, and for whom an arrest warrant has been issued. We recall UN General Assembly Resolution ES 11/4. We reaffirm our unequivocal commitment to the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Russia's attempted annexations have no validity. They constitute serious violations of international law. Our presence today should not be interpreted as recognition of such a change in status. Our participation in this meeting is intended to express our strong opposition to some of the claims made today. In this context, we recall the following facts. The Russian military aggression against Ukraine has resulted in intolerable suffering for children. Switzerland is deeply worried by cases of unlawful deportations and transfers of children, which the Independent Commission of Inquiry found to be war crimes. We urge Russia to immediately implement the recommendations of this commission, including by providing reliable information on deported or transferred children, facilitating communication between them and their families, and proactively initiating their return to Ukraine. International human rights law and international humanitarian law grant special protection to children. Switzerland stresses the importance of the international obligations of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, as well as the Fourth Geneva Convention and the First Additional Protocol. We call on Russia to immediately comply with its obligations under international law. Switzerland reiterates its full support for the ICC as an independent and impartial judicial institution. We strongly support the court's crucial efforts in the fight against impunity, including through independent investigations in various situations. The Security Council has made the protection of children an essential aspect of international peace and security. The best way to protect children is the absence of violence. Switzerland, therefore, continues to strongly condemn the Russian military aggression against Ukraine and calls on Russia to withdraw its troops from the entire territory of Ukraine without delay. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of Switzerland. The representative of Switzerland didn't leave the room when our briefers spoke, but I have a feeling that we were at that time sitting in different rooms. And now I give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
I thank you, Ambassador, for giving me the floor. My delegation regrets, nor does it agree with the content of the conceptual note circulated by your delegation. Furthermore, we reject that among the keynote speakers were included an individual against whom an arrest warrant has been issued by the International Criminal Court at the expense of the institution of the Arria-formula and with the goal of undermining the authority of the court. As a state party to the Rome Statute, Ecuador supports the work of the International Criminal Court and follows very closely the decisions of Prosecutor Karim Khan on investigations of alleged war crimes due to the illegal deportation of children and their illegal transfer from occupied Ukrainian territory to Russia. At the same time, we are alarmed by the results of the report issued last March presented by the International Independent Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine, which recounts very serious and harrowing violations of the human rights of children in the context of the military aggression against Ukraine. Ecuador rejects any violation of international frameworks for the protection of children in context of conflict. We urge the Russian Federation to cooperate with all the investigation processes underway, providing reliable and full information and the whereabouts of every single child. And we reiterate the obligation that Russia has of providing effective communication with their families and to immediately undertake their return to Ukraine in conformity with the best interest of the child and in adherence to its international obligations. Furthermore, we regret that the organizer of the Arria meeting included among the keynote speakers so-called officials of the self-proclaimed republics, which, in conformity with Resolution ES-11/4 of the General Assembly, has not been nor will be recognized. This resolution urges all states and international organizations not to recognize any modification of the status of any of the Ukrainian regions of Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk, or Zaporizhia. And with this in mind, the participation of Ecuador in this Arria-formula meeting should not be, nor can it be, interpreted as a recognition of any modification of this Ukrainian territory. Lastly, we would like to stress that the best way to protect the rights and integrity of children is by putting an end to the military aggression of Russia against Ukraine, pursuant to the decision of the International Court of Justice on the 16th of March of 2022. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ecuador, and now I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Chair. Since Russia's illegal and unprovoked war in Ukraine began, Russia has forcefully separated thousands of children aged between 4 months and 17 years old from their families or legal guardians and moved them to over 40 different facilities in Russia-occupied parts of Ukraine or inside Russia itself. At least 2 of these facilities coordinate the Russian government's policies of forced adoption and fostering of Ukrainian children in Russia. Many of these children still have family in Ukraine. While Russia's brutal war has made others orphans, now they are being held by the country responsible for the death of their loved ones instead of being returned to their homeland. UNHCR Chief Filippo Grandi said in January that Russia is violating the fundamental principles of child protection by issuing Ukrainian children Russian passports and putting them up for adoption. Because of Russia's actions, an estimated 1.5 million Ukrainian children are at risk of depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and other mental health issues. It is outrageous that Russia's event today included Ms. Maria Lvova-Belova, the Russian Federation's Presidential Commissioner for Children's Rights. She is the subject of an International Criminal Court arrest warrant for her part in the war crimes being committed against children in Ukraine. Russia also provided a platform for an unrecognized official from the so-called Donetsk People's Republic. General Assembly Resolution ES-11/4 specifically called on all states and international organizations to not recognize any alteration of the status of the Donetsk region of Ukraine and to refrain from any dealings that might be interpreted as recognizing any such altered status. Russia's actions in highlighting these voices demonstrate its contempt for the UN General Assembly, the Security Council, and for international law. Russia's further attempts today to justify its systematic efforts to separate Ukrainian children from their families and their country by attempting to draw false parallels to other situations is appalling. You have to ask yourself at this point, what is the Russian Federation trying to so desperately to conceal? If Russia is not trying to hide a systematic program to force Russian citizenship upon Ukrainian children, then it should be given humanitarian organizations full access. It is as simple as that. This is why the renewal of the mandate for the Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine at the Human Rights Council last week was an important step. We are appalled by the COIS's finding on children, but unfortunately are not surprised. We will continue to support efforts to document the impact of Russia's war on children, and we reiterate that those who are committing these grave sins against such vulnerable populations must be held to account. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States. To him, I can only repeat to what I have said to Malta, that he should have better listened to to the briefers who provided information that he was so desperately needing, citing figures. We're not trying to conceal here anything. Instead, we wanted to demonstrate and to give you the real figures and the real situation with the children that you consider to be deported to Russia. I found it particularly amusing to the reference of the International Criminal Court by the United States, a country that has not ratified the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court and who has a long and difficult story of relations with that so-called body. And now I give the floor to the representative of Albania.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, we walked out of this room to show our opposition and rejection for the invitation extended to the Presidential Commissioner for Children's Rights of the Russian Federation, Ms. Maria Lvova-Belova, to brief in this meeting. As you know, on 17 March of this year, the International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant to her address, stating that Mrs. Belova bears individual responsibility for the forced deportation of Ukrainian children from Russian-occupied territory to Russia. Bringing a person that is accused of serious crimes by an international court to speak here is a cynical provocation, a misuse of this format meeting, which was never intended to share disinformation, distort realities on the ground, or to advance a biased political narrative. Ms. Belova's place is not to lecture us about the situation of children in Ukraine, but before a court of law to answer the very serious accusations brought against her. We also reject the participation of two representatives of so-called Donetsk People's Republic. We recall UN General Assembly Resolution ES 11/4 and strongly reaffirm our commitment to the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. The attempted illegal annexations by Russia have no validity under international law. Colleagues, Albania has aligned with a declaration by a group of states on the unlawful forced deportation of children by the Russian Federation in Ukraine. We have also made our position clear many times in the Security Council chamber on this issue as part of our position in firm condemnation and rejection of the military aggression of Russia against Ukraine. This aggression continues to cause untold suffering of the entire population in destroying the country with the aim to hold its future hostage. No one bears the brunt of the brutality of the Russian aggression more than women and children. Out of some 8 million refugees from Ukraine scattered across Europe, around 90% are women and children. The latest report of the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine has examined various situations of forced deportation of children from within Ukraine to the Russian Federation, which amount to war crimes. All the credible and reputable sources have reported that many of the younger children transferred are not able to establish contact with their families and might lose contact with them indefinitely. The deportation of children is, unfortunately, a substantial part of the plan of Russia for de-Ukrainization of the country. During this invasion, Russia has systematically destroyed historical, cultural, and religious sites to erase the past and distort the cultural and historic heritage of Ukraine. The well-planned deportation of Ukrainian children aims to destroy the future of the country. Such actions are reprehensible by international law, and those responsible must be held to account. The ICC has brought initial charges, and we fully support its work in the framework of the accountability process. No misinformation campaigns or propaganda exercises can hide the truth of the matter, nor shield individuals from accountability for these crimes. The war in Ukraine is wrong, and its consequences are disastrous. It must be brought to an end immediately for the sake of the people of Ukraine, in particular women and children, and for the sake of their safety and their future. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Albania, and now I give the floor to the representative of France.
Mr. Ambassador, colleagues, France regrets this new cynical exercise of disinformation. A lie repeated 1,000 times remains a lie. We condemn the abuse of the issue of the protection of the rights of the child. The intervention of Madame Lvova-Belova at this meeting is proof of this. This is totally inappropriate and aims to spread propaganda, a totally false version of the situation. We'd like to recall that the judges of the International Criminal Court, at the request of the prosecutor, have issued 2 arrest warrants against the Russian president and, I quote, against the Russian Commissioner for the Rights of the Child. The court acted independently because it estimated there were enough elements of proof to establish the involvement of the Russian high authorities in the deportation of Ukrainian children. These are war crimes. We denounce the cynicism that has led Russia to invite to this informal meeting of the Council an individual under an arrest warrant of the International Criminal Court. We would like to reiterate our condemnation, the strongest possible condemnation, of the deportations by Russia of Ukrainian children. Over 13 months after the start of its illegal aggression, Russia continues to violate flagrantly the fundamental principles of the United Nations Charter, international humanitarian law, and human rights. Russia is inflicting on Ukraine and its people unspeakable suffering. The rights of the child are systematically violated by Russia. The International Independent Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine has documented these atrocities, murders, mutilations, sexual violations committed by Russian armed forces against children, attacks against schools and hospitals, deportation of Ukrainian children towards occupied territories or towards Russia. So many children are adopted by force and deprived of the hope of seeing their country or family. These acts are grave violations of international law, including under the agenda Children in Armed Conflict established by this Council. Those who commit these serious violations deserve their place on the list of infamy of the annual report of the Secretary General. France will persist together with 45 other states in opposing these violations. It invoked on the 30th of March, the 2023, the Moscow mechanism of the OSCE. Independent mission of experts was entrusted with establishing a report of actions constituting war crimes. France will continue providing its support to the indispensable work of international justice. Those responsible for all the crimes committed in Ukraine will have to be held accountable. France reiterates its wholehearted support to the International Criminal Court as well as Ukrainian jurisdictions. We repeat, there will not be lasting peace without justice. Russia must stop targeting civilian Ukrainian population and civilian infrastructure. Russia should stop killing, abducting, and violating children. Russia should end its aggression, withdraw its troops, and immediately return to Ukraine its deported children. Lastly, I want to pay tribute to the courage of Ukrainians who are acting to protect their children and to make sure that to protect their country and to defeat the Russian aggression. France stands side by side with them as long as it's necessary. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France, and now I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
First, let me be clear. We do not recognize Russia's claim to the Donetsk region of Ukraine or the authority of these speakers to represent its people. Once again, Russia is seeking to mislead this council on the devastating consequences of its invasion. Russia has no credibility on this issue. The subject of their disinformation today is their illegal action against Ukraine's children under the pretext of evacuation. The forcible transfer of thousands of children is horrifying. Taken from their homes without the consent of their family members or the Ukrainian authorities for reported re-education and adoption. This will have long-lasting impacts on these children and their families. Russia claims it is protecting these children. Instead, this is a calculated policy that seeks to erase Ukrainian identity and statehood. Chair, if Russia really cared about Ukrainian children, the Russian authorities would provide comprehensive, reliable information about the number of children transferred to Russia and their whereabouts. They would seek to swiftly reunite them with their families and return them to Ukraine. but they do not. The UN Commission of Inquiry in Ukraine reported last week that none of the transfers of children it had examined appeared to have met the requirements in international humanitarian law. The ICC has issued arrest warrants for President Putin and Maria Lvova-Belova after finding that there were reasonable grounds to believe that they bore responsibility for the war crime of unlawful deportation and unlawful transfer of children from occupied areas of Ukraine to Russia. We reaffirm our support for the ICC and its independent and impartial efforts to provide justice in respect of the situation in Ukraine. As member states, we must do everything we can to protect children affected by the horrors of war. Russia must uphold its obligations under international law and protect children affected by the horrors of its invasion of Ukraine. Russia must return forcibly deported children to their families. These children are at risk because of Russia's war. Russia must cease its unprovoked and illegal invasion of Ukraine. That is how best to protect Ukrainian children. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom. You requested a comprehensive and reliable information on the situation with the children evacuated, I stress, not deported from the zone of conflict. This information was presented today, but he chose not to listen to it. And now I give the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Mr. President, children inevitably pay the greatest price of violent conflict. War places children in peril while causing them to suffer devastating and enduring consequences. Children become orphans, their access to education is restricted, and they suffer from unimaginable violence, including sexual violence. The tragic situation of children in Ukraine due to the ongoing war is a matter of utmost concern to the UAE and to the wider international community. According to the latest verified data, at least 501 children have been killed in the war since February 2022, with another 991 injured. The actual numbers could be much higher. The war has also had a major impact on children's sense of stability, as millions of Ukraine's children have been displaced from their homes. More and more children will be adversely affected as this war drags on, causing pain and suffering for years to come. Children face particular vulnerabilities in wartime, and international law has established specific standards pertaining to the treatment and protection of children in light of that harsh reality. These include clear rules under international humanitarian law prohibiting the evacuation of children by parties other than their own nationals from areas of conflict. This prohibition prevails except where their safety or health so demands, on an exceptional and temporary basis, and under strict conditions. We reiterate our call on the parties to fully meet their obligations under international humanitarian law, in particular those related to the protection of children. Moreover, when children are separated from their parents or legal guardians, all efforts must be made to ensure they are reunited as quickly as possible. It is vital that any lack of clarity regarding children evacuated or displaced in the course of the conflict must be addressed by the Russian authorities and the rights of children upheld. Mr. President, every day this conflict continues is another day that tragedy strikes in Ukraine. We cannot state this enough. The only way to permanently stop this tragedy and to end the suffering of Ukrainian children is to bring the war to a just end, consistent with international law and the UN Charter. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Arab Emirates, and that brings us to the close of the Security Council member states that wish to take the floor. I recognize the representative of Gabon asking for the floor again.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, President. And apologies for having inscribed in the list a little bit late. The situation of children in armed conflicts is one of the most concerning issues on the agenda of the United Nations. This issue merits particular attention by the Security Council. Children are a category of the population that pays the highest toll in conflicts. They are direct victims of armed attacks, or they suffer indirectly from their long-term repercussions. Children fall victim to killings, recruitment, abductions, refusal of humanitarian access, trafficking, smuggling, and they are used by terrorist organizations in contravention of relevant international instruments, notably of the Hague Convention on the Protection of Children in its Articles 1 and 6, and international humanitarian law. UNICEF statistics published in its report of March of 2023 on the war in Ukraine say that 487 children were killed, 954 wounded, over 4 million children need humanitarian assistance, 5.7 million children have seen their schooling interrupted, 1.5 million children risk suffering from depression, PTSD, and other mental issues. This leads me to make the following 4 observations. First, the situation of children needs to be addressed in the context of the humanitarian response. That response must be provided to all victims of armed conflicts, wherever the war may be, and the relevant international rules should be applied here. The situation of unaccompanied minors, or those who are separated, are a particular concern for us. Separated children who are deprived of the protection of their parents are easy prey, and they're vulnerable to and prized victims of mafia networks and all other sorts of predators. In these conditions, these children need to be protected from the risk of trafficking, rape, sexual violence, abduction, and exploitation. Secondly, it is unacceptable for the fate of children in wartime to be subject to politicization or any other sort of manipulation. The lives of children should be given the same attention wherever they are. The Hague Convention contains clear provisions. They have to do with the competencies of states. States that are required to regulate the movements of child refugees. Parties must adhere to those provisions. Furthermore, good cooperation of all parties is required. This is particularly the case in the context of international adoptions. These adoptions must meet international provisions and be motivated by only one imperative, the well-being of children, which is a point enshrined in the Geneva Conventions. We encourage the work undertaken by the HRC to register children who are fleeing combat. We welcome the efforts of the specialized agencies of the UN, UNICEF and the WFP, as well as the ICRC for their efforts, without which the everyday lives of children would doubtlessly be much worse. Thirdly, the protection of children in wartime is incumbent on states primarily. When a state is unable to fulfill this imperative, however, there's an obligation to allow humanitarian organizations to provide free and untrammeled assistance to populations that need it, including children that have fallen victim, to provide them with the care and assistance that they need. We welcome in this regard the work of UNICEF, whose presence in Ukraine has been around since 1997, and which was stepped up and strengthened in 2014 and since the war broke out in 2022. Fourth, the parties to the conflicts must respect the resolutions of this Council that protect children in times of conflict, and notably resolutions 1998, 2143, and 2601. Children deserve to live in a stable and safe environment. Their fundamental rights must be respected and protected, as must schools and educational institutions. In conclusion, I reiterate my country's call to the parties to sit down at the negotiating table to find a political solution to this war. This is the only way to avoid an entire generation of children growing up under trauma and insecurity and horror. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Gabon, and I have to apologize to him. He didn't take the floor before. He was supposed to speak the first time. Now, as we are finished with the list of speakers, from the Security Council members, I would like to ask whether any other delegations wishes to take the floor on that matter. I see none, and that brings us closer to the end of our today's meeting. But прежде чем
Before we close this meeting, we would like to turn the floor not to all of the briefers in the interest of time, not all of the briefers that spoke today, but Maria Alexeyeva, she could answer those questions.
Уважаемые члены Совета Безопасности,
Distinguished Security Council, I'm very pleased to be afforded the opportunity today to speak at this high forum. Most importantly, I wish to convey concrete information. I wanted to dispel the fakes and show the opposite side. Because as of now, regrettably, people are seeing only unilateral information, only one-sided information. In actual fact, it was important for me to show you and tell you about what's happening, and if people want to listen, they can. And I wasn't trying to justify anything at all. There was no such attempt. We have a humanitarian mission. We're working with children, those that have suffered from shelling, children that have lived in very difficult situations that led to major hardships, which not even every adult would be able to undergo. We'll continue this work. We'll do this regardless of today's meeting. That's because our work is a humanitarian mission. As for political subtexts, they do not exist. I'd like to make some comments about accusations that we heard. I have developed the impression that apparently you all have the same speechwriter, because it seems that everyone was saying the same thing, although all of us from the very outset have already commented on all of your accusations. We don't have any adoptions. We never have. The other accusations aren't true either. And we haven't barred children from reuniting with their parents if their parents are around. But from today, I haven't heard any name at all. I haven't heard a single fact. But everyone's been speaking in the abstract. They've been talking about deportations, about people being torn away. But I can tell you a lot of things. I'll give you facts, and we will work then. Next is the citizenship issue that was addressed. Nobody has citizenship forced on them. Children can receive citizenship based on their representative, with the consent of that representative. As for the children in children's homes, the legitimate representatives are the heads of those institutions. We're not changing citizenship. Rather, we're giving, in addition, Russian citizenship. When children turn 18, they can decide whether or not to maintain that citizenship or not. Citizenship provides all these social benefits and guarantees under the Russian law. Here, we're providing opportunities while not saddling children with any obligations. Hence, citizenship adds to a children's opportunities. I'll turn now to the International Criminal Court. The Russian Federation does not acknowledge the jurisdiction of the ICC. For us, all of these accusations are absolutely baseless. There's nothing specific that we heard there. This is all based on conjecture. It was based on abstract statements, even in its wording. Hence, we're going to continue working as we've worked before. As for today, I thought it was necessary to speak to this very high forum and to attempt to convey facts about what is happening, facts about how much Russia is doing for children. And it's your right to either accept that information or not to accept it. Thank you.
I thank Maria Alexeyevna for those comments.
The same delegations hurriedly evacuating from this room again. I hope it was not an emergency type evacuation. In any case, we wish them all the best and pray for them. But jokes aside, those delegations are creating history for the Arria-formula meetings. We think what happened today was a complete disgrace on their part, and of course we will remember that. Now I'm switching back to Russian.
I thank our briefers. Thank them for taking the time to convey to the international community the genuine information about the evacuated, rather than the deported, the term that some people have used here, the evacuated children, evacuated from Donbass into other regions. And as the saying goes, people that have ears can hear what happened. As many delegations present in the hall, and those delegations that have left the hall, have mentioned the ICC. This body for Russia has dropped off the map of international judicial bodies. It has finally turned completely into a instrument subservient to Western countries. The activities of the ICC, which our meeting had to do with today, are not only lacking any legal basis, but they're simply inhuman. Incidentally, maybe some people know concepts like presumption of innocence, or maybe that's simply an empty words for you. And maybe the verdict has already been handed down based on the accusations. The ICC is an institution that's trying to say that it's trying to condemn the evacuation of children without any supervision from the areas of hostilities. In its logic, we should have thrown them into the line of fire. In principle, that's all you need to know about this body. And the briefer today said that the ICC, with this precise step, has undermined its reputation. But it's not true. The ICC undermined its reputation a long time ago. I'll give you some other examples. The aggression of the U.S. and NATO against Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya. These led to hundreds of thousands of civilian victims. They included women and children. But we've seen not a single arrest warrant against Western soldiers. I'm not even talking about the leadership of the country. The so-called independent prosecutor of this institution, Mr. Khan, who's a UK citizen, moved first and foremost to deprioritize this work. In other words, he swept everything under the rug. There's another interesting example, the indictment against Muammar Gaddafi. That indictment was slapped together in 3 days, and it's based on false information that is even embarrassing to repeat out loud. And the same thing applies to the distribution of Viagra to those the forces attacking Tripoli and the so-called dark-skinned mercenaries that carried out atrocities. All of this was lies, pure and simple. The Russian Federation is not a party to the Rome Statute. The ICC has no jurisdiction over Russia or its citizens. We view any documents stemming from that body as null and void. By all indications, the ICC has embarked upon the path to self-destruction. For us, this body no longer exists. I thank you, distinguished colleagues, for your participation. I also wish to thank the interpreters and the Secretariat for their assistance. In conclusion, I would like to inform all of you that the videos provided in this meeting, as well as a number of other materials that have to do with this topic, have been posted in the typical cloud depository on the internet. And right now you can see on your screen a QR code, and that has the address. Once more, I thank you. This meeting is adjourned.